Dre Alvarez. You know me everywhere as Nerd Numbers, including Twitter. And with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, and man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Hey, what's going on, Dre? And yeah, we always like to give the qualifier. You know, it's not very deep into the season yet, but at the same time, we do want to accurately portray what actually has happened so far. So these last few weeks have been a lot of fun for me.
Well, the good news, I give you all the credit in the world for this, which is something we haven't really done as much in previous seasons, which is looking at the SRS of the league to get an idea of how things have normalized. Because the first week, the bar for the SRS was like plus 30 to minus 30. As a note, in big NBA season, this is with great teams and bad teams, it's like plus or minus 10. There have been some years where it's like plus or minus 6. So when we started, it's plus or minus 30. Of course, the logical thing is small sample size. We're now to where it's about plus or minus 16. So it's getting closer, but again, it's still really early in the season. And then, of course, as we know from every NBA season, there's going to be stuff that happens. Players are going to heat up that we weren't expecting. Players that have started really hot are going to cool off. You know, some candidates we've put to that are on the Bucks. You know, Chris Middleton. I'm missing one other big on that team. It's Chris Middleton and one other player just playing out of their damn minds. Who knows if they'll keep it up? That's going to happen. Rookies will do good or bad. Players will get injured. All of that will happen. We're just going to have to wait and see. But that, as you said, it doesn't mean we don't have stuff to talk about, including I'm so glad this subject is back. This topic is back. It was one of my favorites back in the day. And last year I had a 1-year-old, and that really affects your time. Luckily, he sleeps enough through the night that I've had time to do this every week, which is the box scores of the week. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk some teams. In particular, we're going to talk the 76ers, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Bucks. If we have any other teams that come up, Brian will talk them. We're going to talk Jimmy Butler some more because, of course, why not? And then we're going to talk David Berry over at the Washington Post. So that should be some fun. It's about the WNBA. Let's just get going, Brian. I really love the fact that you took this as an excuse on our script to talk about Steph Curry. So every week, as a reminder, I do 5 box scores of the week that are good and 3 box scores that are bad. Usually I use production as a driver. Thus far, the best game of the week has yet to not make the list. So I do think that is kind of a qualifier, which is to say, if a player is really that good, I'm going to make sure they make the list in some capacity or another, even though it is subjective. We'll mention one in particular, Brian, that I do put some players on the list that are just more of a subjective basis. And I tend to reserve a spot for a good rookie performance, because usually most weeks, as a reminder, the metric we use is points over par. The way that works is if you took that player's production and had it on a completely average team against another average team. So, for instance, if a player played 35 minutes with a points over par of 20, if the remaining, I said 30 minutes, it would be, let's see, so it is 48, so it's 240. So if the remaining 210 minutes were played by average players against another average team, you would expect them to win by 20. So usually a rookie will get a game that's usually a plus 10 or better points over par. So I'm not usually too particularly worried about that in regards to a given week. So I usually do 4 best scores. The best game of the week usually gets on. The best rookie of the week usually gets on. And then some other mitigating factors decide other things. Triple doubles I like. 2020 games, as you've noticed, Brian. Historical games, and those were 2 of the games that made the list this week. I like that you use this list as an excuse to talk Curry because he did make the list. So here's a rundown for those that haven't read the article. The top player this last week was De'Aaron Fox. I hope I said that name right. Apologies if I didn't. I'll look it up in a bit.
De'Aaron, yeah. They emphasize that first syllable. De'Aaron Fox.
That's the D. Okay. So De'Aaron Fox. So De'Aaron Fox got a 30, 15, and 12 triple-double, which I can't remember. I saw lots of qualifiers online. I call them Brian Burke stats. As a reminder to those, Brian Burke stats are when you see the ESPN stats and info or Elias bring up some arbitrary set of qualifiers for a stat. This is the most passing yards by an AFC quarterback facing an NFC team in the month of September, right? That's the kind of bullshit. So the same point, I saw lots of, this is the youngest player to put up this type of triple-double, which is, it's always fun, but it was the best game of the week. It was a plus 20 points over par game, which, as I mentioned, tends to be on the upper end of the games we've seen. So it was the best game of the week and a historic game, which I liked because the second game that made my list was Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson, for those that don't remember, last Sunday, right? Because we recorded on Tuesday, Brian. That's right.
Yes.
Klay Thompson put up a record-setting 14 threes in a game, and he did it in only 27 minutes, which is a historic game, an amazing game. However, one of the things about that is he wasn't actually the best player in the game. We talked about that last week. I was expecting him to win the list because even if there was a better game, because number 3 on the list was Steph Curry, who did put up the best game, that's a weird way of saying it. He put up the best production score in that game. I even put him lower than Klay Thompson because Klay Thompson was a record setter. So even though that did happen, I was expecting him to win the list. So luckily, De'Aaron Fox did put up I'll put in quotes, historic game. Brian Burke historic, but historic nonetheless. That game that managed to win it. Let's see. I just forgot who I put it fourth. I'm going to have to look.
You've got DeAndre Ayton on there, a great rookie.
Oh, yeah, as I just mentioned, the rookie game. This is I'm going to use this as an excuse to go off on a fun tangent, Brian, which we kind of had last year, which is the Rookie of the Year debate. Right now in the Rookie of the Year debate, I really say it's DeAndre Ayton. It's not even close. That being said, I have viewed the Rookie of the Year award, if we kind of use historical precedent, which is it frustrates me to do that because most of the awards in the NBA aren't explicitly set, right? We have the MVP, and what we have kind of gleaned from how the voters go is MVP means player who scores the most points on a team that's a contender. And in fact, it wasn't until Russell Westbrook won the MVP, averaging a triple-double for the season on a 48-win squad, that we even saw a non-quote-unquote contender win the MVP in years. I mean, even back in the day when Michael Jordan won, I think he was on a 50-win squad. One of his early years that he won an MVP before the Bulls became the Bulls. So we've kind of implicitly gleaned that's a criteria. Now, on the Rookie of the Year award, there have been two kind of criterias that I can see, and sometimes they overlap. One is, who's the best rookie on the court? And the one thing we do have set in stone for Rookie of the Year criteria is, what is a rookie? And all a rookie is this is my first season in the NBA. That is really it. And I believe, I forget, there's a player on the Nuggets who's pretty good or had a good game that doesn't count as a rookie because he played 3 games last season. And I recall that gets, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Brian, and I'm not even going to bother looking it up, I believe that in other sports like baseball, there are some like min cutoffs. You have to play like a minimum of 8 games before you count as a rookie. So as long as you haven't played 8 games, you can have a Rookie of the Year season. It's not quite the same in basketball. But so Rookie of the Year can mean just best player on the court. And sometimes, right, Malcolm Brogdon, a senior who's an average NBA player, wins Rookie of the Year. And we agree, but that's not exciting because we would even agree with everybody else. Malcolm Brogdon's probably not turning into a great star. We have seen players like Kevin Durant and LeBron James win Rookie of the Year before they turn into what they are, and really what I would argue they won the award for is most likely to succeed. Because even in those seasons, I think with LeBron, I think we thought Chris Bosh should have won it. And, Kevin Durant's an interesting one. I'm going to have to look that up just for fun, Brian, but I'll be doing that in the background. So there are two kind of Rookie of the Year criteria. And this season, the two rookies, and we agree wholeheartedly on this, is Ayton versus Doncic. And that is fun. But here is, and arguably I would say last season when we were having the debate about who should be Rookie of the Year, where it's either Simmons or Donovan Mitchell, that was our point. You could arguably give Donovan Mitchell the most likely to succeed in the NBA award. We wouldn't have agreed with that, but that was what people could go for. Whereas you could give Ben Simmons the most productive rookie in the NBA. Now, of course, if you had knocked Ben Simmons, disqualified him as a rookie, we disagree with that point entirely. It would have been Jason Tatum, so there still wasn't a leg to stand on for Donovan Mitchell. But we're actually in that spot right now. I would argue legitimately between Ayton and Doncic, because Doncic has put up some great games. Doncic is currently an above-average player and looks amazing. Ayton is being the most productive. So I kind of really like this Rookie of the Year award race right now. I mean, as you mentioned, we're very short into the season. We're less than a quarter of the way there, so we're going to have tons more to say. But I love that we legitimately have an upside player versus a productive player. Although, I mean, DeAndre Ayton's almost putting up 2020s, as I noted. That's why I made this week's list. So, I think when all is said and done, he'll probably still be my Rookie of the Year, even if we're trying to factor in the upside look.
Yeah, and so far, we've got the wins produced from BoxscoreGeeks.com here for rookies, and so far you're 100% right. Ayton has produced double the wins of the second-place rookie so far. He's got 1.6 produced so far. Mitchell Robinson and Mo Bamba are tied for second with only 0.8, half of what he's done. And you're right. So Doncic and some other players, I can see Trae Young up there has gotten a lot of minutes, and a few other rookies who are playing, like you said, average to above average over a lot of minutes. That's very good for a rookie. That's really tough to do. But Ayton's playing a lot of minutes and playing very good per minute, playing already like he's a veteran per minute. So if this keeps up, I think, based on the numbers, Ayton's easily the rookie of the year.
Use that as, I'll put a pin in it, but I'll say we're going to come back to this point when we talk the 76ers, because I would not want to deprive a Warriors fan of being able to talk Steph Curry, because as we noted on this list, I'm not going to lie. I was a little disappointed this week in the worst scores. Not a lot excited me. Taurean Prince is just a terrible basketball player. Ben Simmons made the list with the most turnovers. It wasn't as exciting to me. There are some games that are just really bad that make me laugh. I did give Jabari Parker the nod. I feel bad about saying the pin thing. We're going to put a pin in that and come back to that when we talk Chicago or Milwaukee. I don't know if Chicago's on the script, so I'll make sure we talk Chicago, Brian. But yeah, Jabari Parker made the list. I wasn't as excited as that, but we finally have a leaderboard in that Steph Curry has now made the list twice, meaning he's the only player on the board, right? Nobody else has made the list. Obviously, we've got some first place, but I'm not doing a freaking leaderboard for just first place players. So Steph Curry, though, he is looking amazing. And I think if I've been recalling from polls and stuff I've seen, not like JIP polls, not like political polls, but just kind of some of the zeitgeist from, like NBA.com and stuff, I believe Curry is currently on the front line for MVP award voting. Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later, but he is. You want to get into it now?
Yeah, let's. How about we start with that, because you wanted to talk Curry, and then we'll just
sure.
go straight from Curry being the MVP. We'll talk a little bit about the Warriors too, so you can have some fun, and then we'll go to the other teams.
Yeah. So no, I mean, what people are saying is, and graphics I'm seeing, on NBA broadcasts are basically, Curry's numbers are looking like his MVP season, that first championship season for the Warriors. He's up around that, insane 0.4 wins produced per 48, which, very few players have ever done that for a full season. So he probably won't keep that up this season. But, yeah, in terms of if he can, be MVP again, I think so. The one thing I'll say is, and we've talked about this a lot, he doesn't pass as much as he used to. He's given that more over to Draymond Green and other playmakers on the Warriors, and he's just started taking more shots himself. We think that's a good thing for the Warriors because he's such a good shooter, right? He should be shooting instead of passing. He also takes really long threes, right? And he is shooting over 50% from three so far this season. He has shot over 45% before 3 different seasons for the whole season. But 50, a 5% jump, that's going to be tough to keep up, considering how many of those long threes and also contested threes he's willing to take. He's less of a catch and shoot player like Klay Thompson. So, I'm skeptical he can keep it up, but he should be the favorite for the MVP for sure right now.
And yeah, we agree in the fact that I really love changing this list to 5. It used to be 10, and changing it to 5 really did help out in that it makes it harder, and that I have to drop games I like. Let's get to the last game. I put Kenneth Faried in the 5th spot. I'm a Kenneth Faried homer. Here was the mental gymnastics I jumped through. Kenneth Faried per 48 put up a 50 points over par game. Again, meaning if Kenneth Faried had played the whole game, an average team, it's an average team, his team would have won by 50. It would have looked very similar to the Toronto Raptors shellacking of the Los Angeles Lakers after the first quarter, but for the whole game. That being said, he only played 3 minutes. I dropped Giannis Antetokounmpo's 26-point game on 11 shot performance, which was also over a plus 20 points over par per 48. It was, it didn't average out that, but a lot of times he played so well they shellacked the Sacramento Kings. The Milwaukee Bucks just absolutely dominated the Sacramento Kings, such that he played that well, and unsurprisingly, he doesn't have to play more than 30 minutes because the game's over. Also, Serge Ibaka, same night, shot, I believe it was either 15 for 16 or 15 from 17 from the field. It was funny because I was watching updates that game. I was really hoping he was just going to get pulled. because they were beating up the Lakers so bad because he was perfect. You know, he was 8 for 8, then 9 for 9. Then I saw him at 11 for 11. He was 13 for 13. I was like, just pull the damn plug. Let him end perfect so he can make the list. In the end, he didn't end up perfect, and I decided to be a little flippant and give it to Kenneth Faried. With who got it. So again, it does make it a lot harder when you do +5. So the fact that Curry has actually had 2 weeks in a row now where he's put up a game that I consider top of the NBA, that's telling, because not only are his numbers just that great, his peak number, like his best games, are also the pinnacle of the NBA right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And my last thought on the list was De'Aaron Fox getting in there. The Kings are still looking okay. They're 6-4 right now, kind of middle of the pack, in point margin. De'Aaron Fox, him playing a lot of minutes has been bad for the Kings. Like, they just kind of gave him a ton of minutes right when he was drafted, and he's just never been good. He's kind of stayed being that bad young player. So if he can actually become good, maybe they can go somewhere. And because what's really happening with them is, I'm going to get this pronunciation wrong, Dre. It might be Bielitsa. He's been their star so far. He's been playing out of his mind, another relatively young player. So if Fox can come up and be that second guy with, I think it's Bielitsa or something similar to that. Willie Cauley-Stein has been another decent young player for them.
Cauley-Stein in the past, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, maybe the Kings can keep this up. I'm not optimistic, but I'm just going to keep watching them.
Are you talking, which
it starts with BJ.
Okay, so according to Basketball Reference, God bless for having pronunciation, it's Nemanja Biel, Byell up, Bielitsa. So you were really
okay.
Close. Not bad. I'm going to give you, because I'm not even gonna, I don't even know if I got the pronunciation guide's pronunciation right. I mean, it was funny. I tweeted about that too. The Sacramento Kings. You gave them a glowing overview. I thought it was funny because I did say the same thing. I was like, holy cow, they've got a winning record. Are they turning things around? And then watched them play the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Milwaukee Bucks just shellacked them. And I was like, maybe not. Although, 6.
What was that, like a 20-point game or something like that? It was a blowout.
Sort of 30. I mean, what also happens in blowout games does tend to be teams calling their bench reserves. One thing that I have loved in their one loss against the Celtics, this happened. The Milwaukee Bucks were down by a bunch, and they almost came back against the Celtics. And last season, the Celtics routinely would put up major comebacks. And this is something Arturo, American Numbers on Twitter, if you don't follow him, has said.
Huge Celtics fan.
It's a joke, because I always say whatever he says about the Celtics, take with a grain of salt. Now I'm going to wax effusive about the Celtics. So nice contradictory thing. Last season, the Celtics were the comeback kings. But I think one of the reasons they were the comeback kings is so many teams see that they're in a 10 to 15-point hole. And if you honestly think about that, so let's give a comparison. The pace is really up in the NBA this season. It's the highest it's been in years, I think, since the 90s. But if we looked at a pace of 100, and what pace of 100 means is there are essentially 100 possessions. And a possession, the possession form that basketball reference is a little complicated, but you can kind of think of it as a team being able to go up and get a shot or a turnover. So it's a 100 possession game is what the average NBA game is. That would mean 25 possessions a quarter. And that would mean, roughly 2 possessions every minute, which for a 24-second shot clock lines up really well with what we see. It makes sense. One of the reasons possessions might be up too, by the way, is I haven't looked at this. I don't have a good play-by-play scraper. I really am jealous of popcornmachine.net. Check them out if you don't. They have the best play-by-play scraper out there, and they have great charts and stuff they make as a result of it. I would be really curious to see the impact of the rule of, I believe they used to reset the shot clock to a full 24 on an offensive rebound, and they've changed that to be like a foul. It's to 14 seconds now. So I'd be curious to see what impact that has had on pace in possession. But okay, 100 possession game, roughly 2 a minute. Okay, so if you're down by 15 points, that is only 5 possessions. That is a 5-possession game. You get 25 possessions in a quarter. So that's 1/5 of a quarter of 12 minutes. That's 3 minutes. If you have an absurd 3 minutes, one of my favorite examples of this, I've said this before on the show, Brian, that I think I watch this clip several times a year, sometimes on a loop. But Tracy McGrady, what was that insane number? Was it 13 points in?
Oh, yeah. I don't remember.
It was 13 points in 35 seconds. Obviously, Google. It was against the Spurs. That's the point. You're down by 15. Some teams throw in the towel with 5 minutes to go, and the response is that is 3 minutes of amazing play. You stop them from scoring 3 times, and you make 3 threes. You make them make a hard 2. You score really quickly. You score a 3 to their 2, and then you score another 3, and you're back in the ball game. So Arturo, as I've mentioned, has noted this before, that when we look at the point margins of games, they don't tend to line up with what we would expect, and he thinks it's because it's artificially constrained, ostensibly by coaches throwing in the towel early or players thinking the game is over. And so that is a strategy we have loved, and looking at the Milwaukee Bucks is go for it. Go for the comeback, because if you're out of it, you can do that. So that is an interesting change, and like I said, with the Bucks, what was a fascinating thing to see.
Yeah, and it's weird. So the game this makes me think of is that Klay Thompson / Steph Curry game from 10-29 you were just talking about. Like, by the time they got into the third quarter and they were just bombing away threes and setting that record, like, Chicago looked done. They weren't really guarding the perimeter anymore. And the Warriors' offense was kind of done too. They were just giving it to Klay and telling him to shoot it. So it was just like extended, 2 quarters worth of garbage time. So that stuff does happen for sure. I get a little suspicious though, because it seems like over 82 games it kind of equals out, But Arturo's theory is interesting to me.
Well, think about 3-point shooting. I think one thing that happens in the NBA that's important to consider, sorry about that, is that once a strategy catches on, it's not usually a game changer because it catches on quickly, but it's very much, I don't know if it's the right one, like tragedy of the commons kind of thing, where it's in everybody's best interest to do something, but nobody does it. And as a result, you kind of keep going forward. A comparison I've heard was in hockey. It was obviously in all of the players' best interest to start wearing helmets with visors, but some players didn't want to do it, and so other players wouldn't because the other players weren't, if that made any sense. And so it really was just in the best interest of the league to say we're gonna do that. In the NBA, when the Warriors and Rockets just came out with Morey ball and were blowing people away, the rest of the NBA had to go, well, we don't have a choice not to do that anymore. So I think that's the interesting part about the strategy point is I think when teams start playing harder against each other, it's just going to catch on. It's not going to be a game-changing strategy. And that's one thing that makes sports really hard, especially for nerds, is we come up and say teams aren't going for it on 4th down, right? That's an inoptimal strategy. Should be
so brutal.
They should be playing optimally. But what happens is a team that suddenly starts taking advantage of it, that starts moneyballing that strategy, the league is going to catch up because it's a copycat league. So I think
but it takes a while.
I think what you're saying, the normalize is over. I mean, basically the point is, as long as lots of teams are doing it, it's going to be fine. But I think as soon as we see a couple more teams, and like I said, the Celtics last year and then the Bucks in one game this year have done it. I think if more teams start going, it's not over till it's over. You have to be impossibly up for us to quit.
Yeah, so I have another basketball example. I don't have these numbers right in front of me, so anyone who knows this can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I remember looking up anyway. So Dre, you remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if you were part of this show or not, but we had Patrick got the then coach of the Seattle Storm, Jenny Busek, onto the show, and she's since been fired from that job. They had a bunch of injuries on that team. Then she went to work in the NBA, which we've been talking about. I think she's even with the Kings right now, which is an interesting coincidence.
I said the Mavericks had my favorite offseason. Not necessarily saying I think they're a contender. They signed DeAndre Jordan, one of our favorite players. They drafted Luka Doncic, one of our favorite players, and the only player they had a shot of getting. They had no shot of Ayton. And then they picked up Jenny Busek to be on the bench. So they had a huge trifecta this offseason. So, yeah, she's with the Mavericks, which we're
Mavericks, happy. Okay.
Got signed. She did work with the Kings. When she got picked up by the Kings, we basically said, we are so happy that she has a job. We're so happy she's in the NBA. Please, please, please go somewhere other than the Kings. And we could not have thought of a better now. Hopefully now that everything's been cleaned up, we hope. Could not have thought of a better destination than the Mavericks.
Yeah, and so the reason I bring that up is when we talked to her, we wanted to talk to her about the numbers side of the WNBA because we were less familiar with it. We want to get her views, right? And for anyone who hasn't listened to that show, it's there on YouTube somewhere. She was so smart and amazing, right? Like everything she said was just great. And one of the things we asked her about was 3-point shooting in the WNBA. It was lagging a little behind the NBA. Again, this is a few years ago. And Curry had kind of just started, doing his thing. And so let's fast forward to this year. The Storm won the WNBA title. All their players, they have mostly the same players, but they got healthy, so that's great. And they have become the top 3-point shooting team in the WNBA. Because one of Patrick's questions was something like, you guys aren't shooting that many threes, and the league in general doesn't shoot very much. And the answer he just kind of got to was, well, the players just weren't there yet, right? Like, they just didn't have good enough 3-point shooters yet, in the league to do that. So, but that's changing, right? Just like the WNBA, they're practicing it more, and those numbers are going up. So yeah, it happens, and it happens quickly and slowly. I don't know. Do you get what I'm trying to say, Dre?
Well, I mean, I've heard Malcolm Gladwell, who I quote all the time, was noticing that kind of weird thing about gay marriage, as an example. But then what he astutely noted as well is so many of these things that seem to happen rapidly. You could think civil rights, you could think gay rights, etc. You think they happen quickly because that's how you remember history. I'm going to give I'm going to give my shout out. I've noticed I've started doing this, Brian. I don't have a problem. I'm going to give my shout out really early in the show and just repeat it at the end of the show. The Cracked podcast today with Alex Schmidt, and I'm going to try and get the guy. I'm going to look up his name because I messed up a name last week doing that, but it was with Stephen Kinzer. So Alex Schmidt and Stephen Kinzer had a podcast on the Spanish-American War, which they noted was kind of a cleverly PR named because it was really the United States saying they wanted to go after Cuba and the Philippines as territories. And they didn't want to say the United States invasion of Cuba and the Philippines. They called it the Spanish-American War.
Yeah, don't go look at the newspaper propaganda in America from that era. It's pretty ugly.
You will love this. So this podcast is for you, Brian, because that's what they talk about.
Oh, do they? Oh, God.
What they actually said is, sorry to get off on this tangent, but I don't really mind, Brian, and I'll hopefully, I don't know if I'll be able to find my way back to my original point, but I do want to talk it. They were talking about the United States at that point in history and the decisions that had to be made and how the media was essentially played. I believe they said William Randolph Hearst, to get them to do stuff like this, which is just really, really kind of funny. And what they were trying to remember. So how was this relating to 3-point? I apologize, Brian. I really do want to.
So I was struggling with kind of trends and how to view how things are adopted, right?
Fast and slow. Perfect. Okay. So thank you. I hate it when I lose a tangent, Brian. So the fast and slow point. When we see history, we will go, like Trump as an example. Holy cow, what the hell happened? And it is not hard to go back in time and start looking at these small little things. I mean, as just a normal example, the Republican Party or the conservative movement or whatever you want to call it did essentially have a 20-year campaign against Hillary that they were ready to pull out in that election. I mean, it's a frustrating thing because people do. The same person, Kinzer, was saying all this talk about Russian interference and all this other stuff. Just Hillary was a bad candidate, and we've had this discussion before where we've said it is possible that a multitude of things won the game for you. It's the problem we've had in the NBA. It is so frustrating that Michael Jordan gets all the credit in the world for the Bulls' 6 finals. He does have 6 finals MVPs because, of course, he's playing next to Pippen, one of the greatest players ever. He's playing next to Horace Grant, the best jack of all trades player in NBA history. He's playing next to Dennis Rodman, the pinnacle of defense, 7-time in a row, led the league in defensive rebounds, total rebounds as well, of course. There's all this other stuff. Karl Malone misses clutch free throws at the right moment. I think the same thing happened. There were some game 7s. I believe one was against the Pacers or Knicks that, they barely squeaked by. All of these other things happened together. So it was not one thing. And we as humans love to do that. We love to say, this one thing is why this thing happened, when it can be a lot of them together and it barely tilts the balance. So the fast and slow point on history, and same with the NBA, I am amazed, right? The NBA's 3-point rate this season, a tweet I've made about this before, is up until this season, there were 19 teams total in the history of the NBA. So this is 1980 on, because the three-point line was introduced in the 1980 season in the NBA. And I really do love that. As you know, for a lot of advanced stats, I really love the 1980 NBA season as just, you start from here. We don't have the luxury that baseball has, which has so many years of data, right? Admittedly, the fields were a lot worse. Conditioning of players was a lot worse. A lot of stuff in the 1800s, but you can still grab a play-by-play sheet of a baseball game in the 1800s and put together a baseball game and get an idea of what happened. We don't have that luxury, right? Coach Nick on Twitter today was arguing with Bob Bulgaris about pace, and he's looking at historical pace games. And a problem we have is, prior to 2000, we don't have play-by-play data, which means we can't really examine the pace of the NBA in historical times. But so getting back to the modern NBA, 1980 on. From 1980 on, there were only, in NBA history, 19 teams that had taken over 30 three-point shots a game total, ever. And a lot of those, by the way, were in recent years. That's the Warriors and Rockets in previous years. We're at 21 right now. And for what it's worth, the Spurs, the Nuggets, and the Thunder are all at 28 or more a game. So this whole happens slowly but happens fastly. Definitely in the NBA. I agree with what you're saying, Brian. And to tie up that tangent, that's the same thing about History of the Crack podcast, is we have all of this stuff in American history that we'll look at and go, holy cow, what the heck happened? And then if you actually get a historian or someone to start needling into it, you go, oh, that's been slowly getting chipped away at. As you were saying, it's kind of funny that Patrick got to ask a question at the front of it with the WNBA saying, why aren't you shooting threes right before it took off? Because it's like, yeah, this strategy slowly catches on, and then boom, explodes.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, poor Coach Busek. If she had more healthy players shooting threes, maybe she'd still have a head coaching job. But
that's gonna lead us into our first team, the 76ers.
76ers, let's go.
Because here's what I love about Coach Busek. What's funny, right, is they just won a title, and they won a title with a lot of the players she had on her squad when she was there. And it would be hard pressed to believe that some of the coaching strategies she used weren't there as well. Another NBA historical thing that I love. This was, I believe it's Paul. Okay, so let me get the full pedigree correct. So the Los Angeles Lakers, when they started winning with the Showtime Lakers, Jeff Pearlman wrote a book about this, which is amazing. Essentially what happened is their first title came under Coach Paul Westhead. But Paul Westhead took over for a coach named Jack McKinney. Jack McKinney got into an auto accident, and unfortunately, his brain was never the same afterwards. His memory wasn't the same. He wasn't able to ever go on and coach again. But this coach took over for him, and after taking over for him, just used his strategy, and they went on to win. And we've seen that happen a lot in many other walks of life. This happens all the time with things like studio executives. We talk movies, where a studio executive will get fired because of poor performance on movies. The next executive does great, and you go, well, they did great, but they did great on all of the movies that were greenlit by their predecessor who you fired. So exactly what you're saying. Coach Busek was fired because the team was underperforming, but then the same players that she was coaching went on to win a title. And the way I'm going to tie that to the NBA is the 76ers were doing great last season and still have a winning record this season, but we're going to talk about why they might be struggling. And the fact of the matter is, we've joked that their current success, if you want to give them credit for it, goes to Sam Hinkie. All of the players that were doing most of the work, and they were on the top last season, they're on the top this season, Brian. Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Robert Covington, those were all Sam Hinkie's guys. The NBA is a very Pareto league. Usually look at the top three players on a team, and that really dictates their success. You've got Curry, Durant, Draymond, or Iguodala, pick a year, right? Obviously, as I was just saying back in the day, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan. I don't know why I said Scottie first, but yes, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, or Dennis Rodman. So if you look at the Philadelphia 76ers success, it was due to someone who left, or was, in this case, was fired. And I wanted to talk about them struggling this year because it's for a very simple reason that we were saying pre-show. It's two players. It's Markelle Fultz and Dario Saric. Now, admittedly, Dario Saric last season was a below-average power forward, but close to – I've used this point before in talking Donovan Mitchell, and rest assured he's going to come up in just a second. I've used this point where if you've got a starting five – and the fifth guy on your starting five isn't great, but is above average. I've called it the Derek Fisher principle. You just need a passable starter. you're fine. Dario Saric last season was that, but this season has been terrible. It's in fact been really bad. So Dario Saric has been bad, as has Markelle Fultz. And that really is it, because it's been funny to watch people freak out about the 76ers, but all I'll say in retort to it is kind of amusing is they are succeeding because of a core that came with Sam Hinkie, and that core is still doing well. The players that are doing poorly are the ones that were picked up by the new management that also got fired and passed on. So I find that a little amusing and a little sad, where I go, man, this core could be something special if they had just picked up good surrounding talent. And I've seen that. We've talked a lot about that before. The Clippers with Doc Rivers, playing Austin Rivers, when you have Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, and Blake Griffin, that was just atrocious. The Oklahoma City Thunder, when they even after losing Harden, having Durant and Westbrook and then playing like Derek Fisher and Kendrick Perkins was just horrendous. So the 76ers are in the same boat, but I think it's amusing because I've seen some people saying they don't have floor spacing, they don't have this, they don't have that. Ben Simmons needs to work on this, and my retort is really Markelle Fultz should not have a starting job on that team, or even a key point, right? He shouldn't be a top 6 player, nor should Dario Saric right now, and that really defines so much of what's hurting him right now.
Yeah, and that's true. And they have 2 guys on the bench, Amir Johnson and TJ McConnell, that they could just put in there and give those minutes, right? And those guys are proven, good veterans. So the coaching aspect is a little disappointing, the minutes. It's almost like they're falling for a narrative in that, well, we've got this process and we've got, Embiid and we've got Simmons, and that's a success of the process, these great young players. So I guess we just have to give Saric and Fultz a bunch of minutes too, because they're guys we've drafted, right? And this is where, numbers should trump narratives, and they should fix that. And, oh, go ahead, Trey.
I really want to. So the numbers trump narratives. The one thing, we're talking strategy in the NBA. 3-point shooting is luckily catching on. We've just said we really hope teams not stepping off the gas or keeping the gas on when they're within 5 possessions in a game should really happen. But the one strategy that has stuck around in the NBA and baffles us, and we were talking this pre-show, is this notion that if you have a top draft pick, you really want them to hop in immediately. And that is just not the case. And that's one thing that is baffling about the 76ers. If you look at the 76ers from last season, well, let me try and at least just do minutes really quick. So I'm going to go to Boxscore Geeks. I'm going to go to the 2017-2018 season. And if we look at minutes, so obviously they've got Ben Simmons, Robert Covington, Dario Saric, JJ Redick, Joel Embiid, TJ McConnell. That's their top 6, then Amir Johnson. So we would probably argue you'd want Amir Johnson over Covington, but okay, those players, those 7 players I just listed account for all of them are the only players that played over 1,000 minutes last season. So you got those 7. That team won 52 wins. You can take that team as is, and especially with aging to Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, and I do want to talk Embiid in a second too. You take that team, they're winning really well. Just keep that team and let them win some more. And then if you have a young player like Fultz that you think is going to be great, you take Fultz and you slowly ramp him up. But so many teams, when they draft a player, particularly a lottery pick and particularly a first rounder, usually a lottery pick almost assuredly, and a top 3 pick like guaranteed. They're like, we drafted this player, we've got to get him in. And our logic is you should never, ever, 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 ever count on a draft pick in their first year to be a starter. If they are, it's amazing. If they are Ben Simmons, it's amazing. In fact, last season, the 76ers had a lucky advantage with TJ McConnell in that if Ben Simmons isn't looking good, and he looked good, amazing. I mean, that's the good news, right? Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton this season, they played a couple games. And in fact, Luka Doncic is exactly what I want. Let me see if I can get this up in front of me, Brian. But so if I recall, Luka Doncic was on a small minutes restriction, not a major one, and slowly got, and by the way, and slow in this case doesn't mean that many games. Like slow can just mean, okay, I guess I'm full of it, Brian, because I guess he got 31 minutes. He got 31 minutes from the get-go. 36 is next. So I guess I'm making stuff up. I thought, I think I'm remembering DFS stuff where I think I heard he was on a possible minutes restriction, and obviously that went out the door very quickly. But the point is, if you have a rookie that looks good and turns out good quick, you can play them. But in the case of, say, Markelle Fultz, he has not looked good and he's still getting burned. And we don't understand that. And we were saying the same thing last season about Donovan Mitchell, where what was frustrating to us is that even if you believed he was having a good season, which we argue he was not, it is a horrendous strategy to try and play a rookie player 30 minutes a game or give them 20 shots a game. It just does not make sense. So Fultz is getting, I mean, there's a few simple changes to the 76ers this season that explain their woes. Fultz is getting 10 shots in 24 minutes a game and is bad. Ben Simmons actually is playing about as well, if not better, than last season, even with some other stuff I'll talk in a second. He's playing 4 fewer minutes a game. So if you play a bad player more minutes, you play one of your good players fewer minutes, you're going to get worse. And we just don't understand why teams go, I've got this top touted rookie pick, I've got to play them. I'll let the capper on this be something else. I've talked, Brian, about the stupid treadmill of mediocrity meme and myth. So the treadmill of mediocrity myth, for those who don't know, was named by Kevin Pritchard. I don't know if he was still the GM of the Portland Trail Blazers at the time, but the recently Portland GM at that time. This was around the era that they drafted Greg Oden. And what he said is, the rough part about being a GM is if you're just this 40-win team that routinely is on the cusp of making the playoffs, you just get these medium-level draft picks. And even if you draft well a couple seasons in a row, it's easy for you to get kicked out of the league, and you're not going to get a star that way, and you really need a star to win. Now, we agree with that argument. You need a star to win. But the argument you can't get a star later in the draft is false. Like I said, Giannis and Jimmy Butler are 2 of the best players in the league, and neither of them were picked that. So is Kawhi. You know, Kawhi and Giannis are the 2 best players out. And I think Kyle Lowry was late, too, if I don't recall. I'll look that up in a sec.
Yeah, even Steph Curry was not a top 5 pick.
Well, sorry. At least Steph Curry was a top 10 pick.
That's true.
You could kind of argue, Don Nelson really liked him. The argument was people were, they really liked him. The Golden State Warriors would have picked him if they had a higher pick because they really liked him and it was other teams missing him. But Kyle Lowry, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, those are the 3 top players out east, and those were all picked 15-15, and Kyle Lowry was 24th. So we don't agree with that argument. But the problem that teams have with the I've got a tank to get a star is teams tank, they get a top pick, and then it's actually, in my opinion, sometimes a hindrance because you've got this top pick and you can't give up on them when it turns out they don't turn out to be something great. You get Andrea Bargnani's or Darko Milicic's. Now, luckily with Darko, it's kind of a funny one. The Pistons lucked out in that they were like, no, we don't want him. But every other team that picked up Darko was like, we've got to give him a chance. So it's amusing to me that there's this myth in the NBA that you need a top draft pick to compete. And the downside they miss is when you get a top draft pick, the strategy currently is give that top draft pick lots of minutes, which can hurt your team. And then another side effect that we've noticed that's hurt many teams is teams can't give up on him. And like I would argue with the Toronto Raptors that their refusal to give up on Andrea Bargnani because he was a number 1 pick cost them Chris Bosh and arguably cost them a couple of years of the playoffs.
Yeah, and I'll put these 2 players into slightly different buckets here. So Saric, I'm just not very high on, and I put him into that like Morris brother kind of category of player, which is like a power forward that's categorized as a stretch 4 that attempts threes but doesn't really make them. He's shooting, 20-something% right now, 23.2% on threes. So he's attempting 8.4 per 48. So he should just not be attempting them, right? Just because he's willing to doesn't mean he should. And then you look at the other side of it. Well, is he, doing the defensive side of being a power forward, which is important? Well, he's not really there. He doesn't really protect the rim or rebound that much. So if that's the case, I just don't, see why he's out there. He's young enough that maybe he'll improve, but I just don't see it there. Now, Fultz I'll put in a different category. First of all, because he is a little bit younger, but he does do a lot of stuff well. He's putting up. Who he's kind of looking like right now is that young Russell Westbrook. He's getting a lot of rebounds, a great assist to turnover ratio. He just is shooting like crap and taking a lot of shots. So I could see Fultz maybe getting some minutes if they're just like, you got to tone down the shot attempts a little bit for now. But as we know, that's really hard for players to do. So most likely they should just bench both players for a while.
It's that is our logic, is that as an NBA team, there is no excuse. And actually,
because they're a team that's going for a title this year, right?
Well, any team. So let's get into the next team, which
Sure.
is the Lakers. And the reason I want to get into the Lakers is there's actually some news. We're actually going to talk some news on this show, Brian. And I believe, has this happened yet? I know the full story is Tyson bought out by the Phoenix Suns. Kind of makes sense with how well DeAndre Ayton's playing, and they're not doing anything. It's a rough one, right? That's why we hate the NBA draft, and we're going to get back to that later on the show. Is they're basically like, Tyson Chandler doesn't do anything for us. We're going to actually save some money if we waive him because someone will pick him up off the waivers. And, DeAndre Ayton's playing great. But so Tyson Chandler got waived. The Lakers, I believe, are the front runners to pick him up.
Yep.
And people are going, well, why would you do that? And I thought, well, this is fantastic because even though JaVale McGee, by the way, crazy note, Brian, giving JaVale McGee starters minutes, he plays like a starter and has been playing really well.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, JaVale McGee's been, but we've also worried about age and conditioning. And you go, there's this strategy that doesn't really happen, although kind of did this offseason with the Milwaukee Brewers in baseball, called pitching by committee. So the standard strategy in baseball, as I understand it, is you have a starting pitcher that's expected to play at least 5 innings, ideal world up to 6 or 7 if they're pitching well. And, if they pitch really well, they pitch the whole game. And then you have these closers and relievers that, usually pitch 1, maybe 2 innings, maybe 3 if they're really, really good. Though that we did have this offseason where I'm trying to remember it was Eovaldi, right, for the Red Sox, who managed to pitch. I think he ended up pitching. Oh, no, it was for Houston, right? It was for Houston, but he pitched like 6 innings starting the 12th inning. That's funny. But anyway, so all of, the idea of pitching by committee is, what if instead of having a starter that pitched 6 to 7 innings and some relievers, you have 3 relievers that pitch 3 innings each. And and part of the reason the strategy seems appealing is that all of them can just throw fire. They don't have to worry about saving their arm to last the whole game. They're just pitching as hard as they can because that's what relievers typically do now. And that's an idea. And you'd have to ask some sabermetricians about the strategy of it. Like I said, the Brewers seem to do it to varying success, right? They were a game away from the World Series this offseason. But I've wondered about that too in the NBA, which is if you can get 2 starters, JaVale McGee plus Tyson Chandler are going to cost less than $6 million. And that is less than a mid-level exception. A mid-level exception would be for 1 player. If you can find 2 veterans that are above average, that you can sign for less than the money of that can play productive at a position for the full starters minutes you're going to need, right? That's going to be 36 to 40 minutes on a normal game, possibly 48 if it's really close. But then if the game is a blowout or they're losing, like we were saying, you could pull them. Why don't more teams do that? So we're actually really excited about Tyson Chandler to the Lakers for this, and confused why more teams aren't doing it. And then just to tie that back to the 76ers, that's the annoying point. Instead of saying maybe Saric will improve, instead of saying maybe Fultz will be great, you say, look, I've got Amir Johnson. Amir Johnson, I believe, costs nothing. I'm going to look him up on a Spotrac really quick.
Yeah, so he had one of those like short, expensive contracts just to get to the salary floor last year. I don't know if he still has it this year.
Guess what he's at this. So by the way, this. I'm going to actually apologize because I was a little critical of that move. And it actually worked out in their favor in 2 ways. So what happened last season with the 76ers is they signed Amir Johnson and J.J. Redick to expensive 1-year deals. We really like Amir Johnson. J.J. Redick, I'm putting him in that Derek Fisher principle. He was not worth that money last season. The reason it paid off for them is Amir Johnson is signed for $2.4 million this season, and that rounds to 0. That's my opinion.
Yep.
The modern salary cap's roughly $100 million, and it's slowly creeping up. That rounds to 0. JJ Redick is at 12.225. So that's, I would say, he's slightly overpaid, but he's basically an average. He's close to an average player. So he's slightly overpaid, and the benefit, I've mentioned this argument before, is if you have a slightly overpaid player, you just have to raise your hand and say, look, we're losing money on this player. Are we making it up elsewhere? And you just say, yeah, Ben Simmons still on his rookie deal. And you go, okay, good. I'll lose $2 million to JJ Redick. We think they probably could have done better. That's going to be our complaint. But it worked out. They signed JJ Redick and Amir Johnson to 1-year deals that were above price, but then they kept them for another year below price, meaning JJ Redick and Amir Johnson net was a good deal for them. The problem we have is then instead of taking the savings they got from J.J. Redick and Amir Johnson and signing productive veterans, they didn't sign good players. And as we're mentioning, they're still giving burn to Saric and Fultz. And so what we would say any team should be able to do is go, I can get at least 36 minutes of above average veteran play for close to league average cost. I do not think, because the strategy is not caught on across the NBA, I don't think that's too harsh of a requirement for any team. And then if you have 1 or 2 star players or 3 really good players, as the 76ers do right now, you should be fine. And so the reason we're frustrated with the 76ers is because they're essentially doing that. They're wasting time and minutes on a player that they should be able to replace for cheap. And actually, the Lakers, the funny thing, and when I said the Lakers woes, I tweeted this out, and I think you liked it this week, Brian. The funny thing about the Lakers and people hating GM LeBron, who you were on board with, is that if you look at the veterans, if you look at Rajon Rondo, LeBron James, Lance Stevenson, JaVale McGee, that's LeBron James GM, those players are all playing great. And the reason this team is struggling is I think there are 2 reasons. I'm going to have to verify one. But basically, if you look at KCP, Ingram, and Kuzma, they're just – actually, I think it's just KCP. I think KCP and Kuzma are playing really bad. And
Ingram's been kind of mediocre.
Ingram's below average, but he's still okay. So, I mean, that's really what this team boils down to, is that they played some below average – is they have some really below average young players. And then also, I mean, just let's be fair. They lost to Portland in the Garden, which they've done forever. That's a really good matchup, and Portland is a good team. They lost to Houston. They're kind of unlucky. I've talked this before, where the last season, Brian, the Warriors pissed me off so much with the Denver Nuggets because the Warriors were 2 teams. There was healthy Warriors, which kicked everybody's ass, looked like one of the best teams in NBA history, was the top SRS team when they were healthy and went on to win a title. And there was injured Warriors, which literally lost like everybody. There was a point last season where the Warriors were missing Curry, Durant, Clay, and Draymond. Not for a long stretch of time, but I'm just saying there were teams that got to play the Warriors bench and get a game. And there were teams like the Nuggets that got to play the Warriors full strength and got annihilated. And that's a point in the standings, which is so annoying. So the Lakers got to play the healthy Houston Rockets back when Chris Paul, James Harden, and Capella were all healthy. And they lost. And then, of course, Chris Paul gets injured. James Harden gets injured. Carmelo Anthony sucks it up. And as a result, other teams have beaten the Rockets. But essentially, the Lakers got screwed in the standings against some other Western Conference teams that they played a healthy Rockets. And other teams, I'm hoping, if we have faith in Daryl Morey, that if they pick up Jimmy Butler or if they get off their asses and bench Carmelo Anthony, that this team looks strong again later in the season. They're going to be teams that picked up wins against the Rockets in the early part of the season that it's just like it's a gift. So that happened to the Lakers in reverse, right? They got burned. They lost 2 very close games to the Spurs, who are a above average team this season. It's what we said, Brian. I'm still shocked that it turned out that way. They lost to Minnesota, another similar situation to the freaking Rockets. They've had that Jimmy Butler saga going on. There was a game Jimmy Butler came back, and he and Andrew Wiggins, he and Karl Anthony Towns played really well to beat the Lakers, and then Jimmy Butler got injured and has been on the bench. So it's like this team has legitimately lost some close games to some good teams. That's Portland and the Spurs. They've been unlucky in that some teams that have turmoil actually showed up against them, and then they just lost on a back-to-back to Toronto. Toronto was, without Kawhi, a 60-win team last season. This is a back-to-back. This team, even still without Kawhi, is amazing. So it's kind of the people that are thinking the sky is falling on the Lakers, given that they're 4-6, you can just go, look, it was the same point I kind of made to you about the Warriors the first week of the NBA season, Brian, which was the Warriors were this close to being 0-3. Now, you astutely noted they had a really hard competition. So coming out against that competition 2-1, when they had hard competition and still had some injuries, was a great get. But the Lakers are basically the inverse of that. I think this team could easily be 6-4 or 7-3, and it's just some close games. And it's not their veterans, it's their young players, which I know will surprise some. And so we're still in the point of, don't be worried about this team. I'm going to try and look really quick at the NBA just as a whole, Brian. But even last week I was noting that the Lakers were only like 2 or 3 games out of the playoffs. Yeah, the Oklahoma City Thunder, if the playoffs started today, are in the playoffs with a 4-4 record. The Los Angeles Lakers are 4-6. That's just 1 game back, right? They only have to, they only have to get 2 games back, right? That's only 2 games back from the Thunder. That's not hard to make up. They beat the Thunder in 1 game, and they're almost there.
Yeah, and this gets back to what we were talking about the opening of the show, right? Even if we can't say too much about this early season, let's at least, make sure the numbers are behind what we're saying. So the 76ers are the same thing, right? If you look at what if you look at their roster, like you were saying, Amir Johnson, TJ McConnell had the lowest amount of minutes out of any of their 10, rotation players that have 100 minutes or more, right? And they look great on offense. And what's the problem with the 76ers right now? Their defense is pretty good, but their offense has been total crap, right? So you can say, well, maybe Saric and Fultz, maybe if their offense looks really bad on paper, maybe there's something going on with the team defense that they really do for the 76ers that you need to keep them out there. Well, I'd argue their offense is so bad that that's just not worth it, right? Get these guys on the bench, get McConnell and Johnson in there. And the Lakers are the same way, so except reverse. And by that I mean there's a story that came about the Lakers a few days ago, which is that Magic Johnson came in and confronted Luke Walton, and some have even criticized it and said it was bullying or whatever. I don't know the details of this conversation, so I won't get into that. But the point is that he basically told Luke Walton, you need to run the offense better and stuff like that, right? But that just doesn't match the numbers. Lakers offense hasn't been that bad, but their defense has been, one of the worst in the league. So why is Magic Johnson going after Luke Walton for offense? I mean, he might not be wrong. Magic Johnson's one of the best offensive players of all time, so I'd probably listen to what he had to say about offense. But they should be worrying about defense right now.
I do have a retort on that we've talked before, which is one of the hard parts is being good at doing something does not being good at teaching it. And I found in this the now defunct Short Corner podcast, I know Justin Halpern talked about this, where he was a really good college baseball player. And he said they got a hitting coach. And this hitting coach was a good, I believe, major league hitter, and I've already forgotten the name. But, what you'll have happen sometimes with athletes, especially really good ones, is when they come to try and teach, they're like, you just have to do this. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you good at doing this? Michael Jordan with the Charlotte Bobcats was notorious for this. He'd want to play one-on-one against the players to say, here's why you suck. So I think, with Magic Johnson, he's one of the greatest ever. And if you, for fun, for people that don't do this regularly to realize just how good he was, go look up a clip show of Magic Johnson on YouTube. This guy is amazing. Passes that are just darts. One play he fell over is one of my favorite. He fell over and passed through a guy's legs. It was just amazing. He's great at it.
He lives up to his nickname.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was named appropriately. But the annoying part is Magic Johnson. Everything comes easy and naturally. Not easy. I actually don't want to say it that way. A lot of stuff he understands almost at an implicit level that's so fast and so easy to him relative to other people, because I don't want to say he didn't work hard, because he did. But, a lot of stuff comes more naturally than other people, that when he's trying to coach, he's like, just be better. And I know LeBron James had some of the same stuff, where there have been rumors that people don't like playing with LeBron James because, he shouts at him or gets angry. And obviously from a LeBron James standpoint, he's like, I am amazing and good and I can do everything. Why can't you just do everything? And we've had this point that many NBA players, it's not that they are bad players or stupid, like Melo. It's not that Melo is intentionally not playing as good as LeBron. He can't play as good as LeBron. He is playing as he thinks is helping, or as he thinks is going to help his, money or bottom line. So that's what happens a lot with coaching, where if Magic says, why aren't your guys playing better? You can just say, look, the rookies are bad. And I know you want me, that's probably the other hard part, right? KCP had a really good season last year. Kyle Kuzma looked amazing, had, the Linsanity start. And you go, the smart strategy is I just play my veterans and slowly ramp up the young players until they're good. But no one likes that strategy. Everybody likes, well, you've got this young hot player, you have to play them. And to be fair, the annoying part about the Lakers is both Josh Hart and Lonzo Ball look, if I recall, unless something has majorly changed recently, they both look really good right now.
Let's go to the Lakers roster.
Am I mistaken on that? Yeah, I thought I was trying to stall to see who would win. But okay, so Josh Hart, yes, still a great, 50% better than an average NBA player. That's out of a sophomore. That is great. Lonzo Ball looks amazing. I actually want to see something about Lonzo Ball. Hot diggity, Brian. Hot diggity. Lonzo Ball last season was remarkable, because what I said is, like, he was on pace, and I don't remember if he finished this way, to be the worst scorer in NBA history, if you're factoring in volume and efficiency. He was god awful. This season, his 3-point shooting is 41.3%. His true shooting percentage is 58.6. Yeah, this team, essentially, it is so much like the 76ers, which is, you've got three players. You've got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Brandon Ingram, and I'm trying to see, there's one more, Kyle Kuzma.
Yep.
Those three guys, which I would argue you should be able to replace all of their minutes, right? Kyle Kuzma, you've got Josh Hart and LeBron James and Lance Stevenson. You should be able to just give them, maybe not LeBron James, but, maybe Josh Hart and Lance Stevenson a few more minutes. The other one, Brandon Ingram, again, he's small forward. It's like, you've got these players that if you just stopped playing them. And in fact, let's take a look. Brandon
Well,
Ingram,
let me be explicit, Dre. Here's my recommendation to Luke Walton as Tyson Chandler comes in. Just take his minutes directly from Kuzma and Ingram, and there you go. You'll get bigger. You'll be better on defense.
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
You've got JaVale McGee, LeBron James, and Tyson Chandler, and you should be able to play some combo of those three. And then also, we've kind of thought this before, which is it's hard to play a lot of bigs, but you have so many playmakers, including Lonzo Ball and Ben Simmons. I love so much, and that they're cheat codes because they play like bigs. So as long as you've got Lonzo Ball or Ben Simmons, I don't mind you playing multiple bigs on the court, Tyson Chandler plus JaVale McGee, because those players bring you stretch, et cetera. And by the way, the annoying thing about floor stretch is Lonzo Ball this season, explicit floor stretch. He can shoot from outside. Ben Simmons can pass. Now, the one thing that I think is amusing, and this is what I would do. Ben Simmons is depressing me a little this season, in that his true shooting is not that great. And a huge part, like this is the hill I die on now, is free throws. He's up to 62.3%, but that is still not good enough. But if we go look at his shots, his shooting, which you can do, if you go to Basketball Reference, Ben Simmons, there's a shooting tab at the bottom. At the hoop, he's a little worse this season than he was last year. Last season, he shot 74% at the rim. That's 0 to 3 feet. This season, he's at 71.7. Still acceptable, not quite as good. From everywhere else, he is 33.3% from 3 to 10 feet and 20% from 10 to 16 feet. He is horrible at everything but layups. We're okay with this. I would prefer Ben Simmons, even at 25%. I would prefer Ben Simmons try and just shoot some threes. I'm going to fall on that board. Two threes a game, Ben Simmons. Here's what you do. You start taking 2 threes a game. You just have to get to 25%, because 25% replaces those stupid effing shots you're taking from mid-range right now. If you do that, like you were saying, Brian, I love this point. I really do want to find the article or the stuff, which is the idea of I'm sorry, I have to do something real quick. But the idea of the play action fake in football. There's this idea that you have to, let me make sure I'm getting the term right.
Yeah, it was a Football Outsiders article, I believe.
But you have to, the idea in normal, the conventional wisdom is you have to establish the run so they'll actually bite if you do it. Otherwise, they won't believe that you're actually running. That if you haven't been running and you try and do a play action fake, they go, they're just passing, we know it, and they don't fall for it. That's the belief. But you were saying that teams, essentially, it doesn't matter if you haven't established the run but still do a play action, they'll still bite on it because they're just so conditioned as defenses that they don't have the time. And we've had the same thought about basketball. Basketball happens so quick that if you see a player at the 3-point line, you don't have time to think in your head, okay, that guy actually, his 3-point shooting efficiency is, he's Dario Saric. That guy's 3-point shooting efficiency is 25%. It's likely not going to go in. I really don't need to rush out on him. I should really close out on Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons, because those two guys, both shoot over 70% at the hoop and are both really good at cutting, and they both have open lanes. So I should cut off that lane first to stop that.
Then you'd be standing on the court for 5 seconds while the play went past you, right?
And then I can't remember if I've said it on air before, Brian, but one of my favorite examples is Allen Iverson. And for what it's worth, in his prime, Allen Iverson was actually a really good passer. I would say Allen Iverson falls in this category of a player that either believed he was helping his team with his scoring, which maybe he was or wasn't, or was doing it to get paid, and we can't lament either of those things. But Allen Iverson, essentially, if Allen Iverson had taken 3 or 4 fewer shots a game and passed more, I think we would have actually been more on side with him being maybe not MVP caliber, but really good.
He's a good defensive player too.
And that's the heart. This is that exact same thing I said about defense and not trusting. I don't know if I said this on the show or pre-show, Brian, But I hate this idea that people say they can judge how good a player is at defense. That is just a really hard thing to do. And by defense, what we mean is on-ball defense impacting opponent shooting. That is a really, really hard thing to gauge. And what we were saying about that is we don't believe anybody that says, Karl Anthony Towns is a bad defender, Carmelo Anthony is a bad defender, Kyrie Irving's a bad defender, because we've seen bad defenders go to new teams with new schemes and do well. So Allen Iverson, though, yeah, he did, I believe, he was very good at steals and I think close to average at passing. So with that being said, he had a game because he was a really good distributor. And there was a game that near the end of the half, one of his players, I believe it was Reggie Evans, was standing on the sidelines because he was a bench player. So he was at the end of the bench, and he's standing up watching the game cheering because there's like 5 seconds left on the clock. And Allen Iverson sees him because he's standing at the corner 3 position, and he passes him the ball because he's running around really quick. In his peripheral vision, he sees a nugget in the best 3-point shooting position, and basically just goes, well, holy hell, he's standing right there. Why wouldn't I just pass him the ball? And of course, he ends up laughing about it after the fact because he passes him the ball, it goes out of bounds, the turnover, but he's chuckling. So the same notion where if Ben Simmons is threatening to take a 3 and you're an opposing player, are you really going to be able to say that's Ben Simmons, he's not going to make it? You're going to bite immediately. And so that's my argument. I would say that Ben Simmons could help out that. That was a long tangent. But annoyingly with the Lakers, I think we agree with what you're saying. It's just take Kyle Kuzma's minutes, give him to Tyson Chandler, and then you know what you can do with Kyle Kuzma? You slowly ramp him back in. It's just baffling that teams think that the solution is a rookie or young player has a good game, and the solution is to make them a starting rotation player if you have better veterans on the bench.
Yeah, and the Lakers don't even have to go as far as you're saying to improve their rotation. And by that I mean, Chandler and McGee out there at once, they don't even need to do that. So right now, let's go back to their roster here. They've got 3 centers on their roster right now. They got McGee, but they've also got Jonathan Williams and, Chris Ye's boy Zubats. Williams and Zubats just aren't getting minutes, right? So really they just have a 1 center rotation. So it's McGee and then just small ball. That's it. If they were just to give Tyson Chandler 20 minutes at center and played McGee 20 minutes there and Chandler 20 minutes there, that's already going to improve their defense tremendously, I think, just by reducing the amount of centerless small ball. So, yeah, even without doing super big lineups, I think Tyson Chandler can get worked into that rotation.
I've been seeing LeBron James get bashed for his defense. And, again, I hate this. And I'll come back to another player that I always bring up, which is, how did I just drop his name? Played for the Knicks and for the Warriors, David Lee. So David Lee got bashed a lot for his defense back in the day, including in a very famous now Sloan paper by Kurt Goldsberry.
Right.
Bashing David Lee. Now, what was funny is when David Lee started his career, he was really played as a power forward. And because of his size, he slowly got moved to a center and was not very good at defending against opposing centers, from what I can tell. And like I said, like the Kurt Goldsberry stuff kind of back this up. What that could mean is he was not good at defending the centers when they got to the hoop. That was something that got funny as I was watching the Warriors over time, which is they were actually their defensive woes until they got in Iguodala were actually 3-point line based. So David Lee was bad at defending centers when they shot at the hoop, but centers shot at the hoop less average than the rest of the league. So it's a funny thing because it's so hard to judge a player's defense when if they keep a player out of the paint, that doesn't show up anywhere. I just sound like one of those stupid talking heads that bashes stats all the time, Brian, where I'm like, things that don't show up in the box score. But it's true where when you are trying to tell me a player is bad at defense and you say, look at David Lee on contested shots against opposing centers gives up 60% or something, right? And an easy question to ask is, what about the number of times that the opposing center got the ball, David Lee closed out on him because he's fast enough, and they passed the ball back and someone else took the shot? That's one reason I routinely hate this idea of individual defense, because it is not a thing in the NBA. I'm sorry. It is, I think I was saying this to you pre-show, Brian, it is very football-like in that you are designing a play that is designed to muck up the opposing defense. And sometimes the person who gets caught short-handed, it is not that they are a bad defender. The examples I used were 2 Denver Broncos, Von Miller now, and back in the day, Champ Bailey. These are 2 of the greatest defenders that I on various games saw stifled. Von Miller gets no sacks. Bailey just, gets gassed. And it's because the opposition had a really good play that basically would handcuff Champ Bailey so he couldn't run or be as close on coverage to the guy, so the guy got a little more coverage. Or Von Miller, they just had a good, block so that he couldn't get through. It's like, it is so annoying in the NBA for people to do that. So with LeBron James bashing his defense, but to compare him to David Lee, an annoying part there is, what if they're just being played incorrectly? David Lee, for most of his career, was played as a center and was not good, from what we could see, at on-ball center defense. If you played him as a power forward and played him next to, interesting, it would have worked well, right, Brian? Had they picked up DeAndre Jordan back in the day like they wanted to for the Warriors. Had he played next to DeAndre Jordan, I argue his defense would have looked a lot better, and the team's defense would have looked that better. To your point on LeBron James, JaVale McGee, they are playing essentially a one-center rotation. And LeBron James is the biggest guy. So if JaVale McGee isn't in there, LeBron James is having to cover the opposing centers, and that is not a good matchup as LeBron James has gotten older. And that was actually one last interesting point, Brian. It's more anecdotal because I haven't had the time to analyze this. The Lakers just seem to give up fourth quarters, and I do really wonder if that is just the veteran problem. They've got a lot of really good players that are productive, and then they're just getting gassed. I know one thing that I believe I heard, and let's see if this is true. I think Luke Walton wanted to play a fast pace, and they are fourth in the NBA. I wonder if Luke Walton should slow down the pace a little, because they are a good offensive team. So if he slows down the pace a little, gets another center, which they're doing with Tyson Chandler, I think this team is fine. So it's interesting where a lot of people are freaking out already to the point on Basketball Reference. They're an expected 5-6 team, and those 6 losses have come against good teams. I am not worried in the slightest yet.
Yeah, they're fine.
Yep. So no real woes. Brian, let's talk some over optimism. I have a tiebreaker I've decided. So as I mentioned in the Boxscore Geeks drinking game, I live in Wisconsin, but I'm from Colorado originally, which means a lot of times the teams I root for are Colorado or Wisconsin based. In the case of football, it's really hard because the Packers and the Broncos, it's really hard to decide. I have kind of decided I'm really an Aaron Rodgers fan more than a Packers fan, but is what it is. But the tie-breaking decision I had, which actually occurred this year, Brian, is the best performance in postseason play against the two teams dictates who wins my number one spot. So this season, the Brewers beat the Rockies in the playoffs. So the Brewers are now my number one baseball team. The Rockies are my number two. The last time that the Broncos and the Packers played, it was in the Super Bowl, and John Elway did defeat Brett Favre. So now, admittedly, that was Terrell Davis. It wasn't John Elway, but the Broncos therefore beat the Packers in my 1-2. So until the Broncos and Packers play each other in a Super Bowl, which is not going to happen for at least not this year, Brian, Broncos are my number one. And here's hoping that the Denver Nuggets and the Milwaukee Bucks make the finals against each other this year. Greatest thing since sliced bread. I want to talk the Nugs first, and I'm actually going to be a little both optimistic and dour simultaneously. So the Nuggets, obviously, Nikola Jokic has had some great games, but he's also had some below subpar games, so he's still a great player. Millsap looks really healthy. Now, I don't think he's worth $30 million, but he is an above-average player, which is huge. I was so worried that he was going to be a below-average player and hurt the team when he got a starting spot from some of the better players. We have some other good power forwards. We have Mason Plumlee. Trey Lyles hasn't looked good this season. I'd argue Trey Lyles' problem, and this is a frustrating one from an analytics perspective when we're talking rotations, and even what I was saying about Kuzma, so I'm going to immediately contradict myself, Brian, is I think if you are a good caliber NBA player and your minutes are taken away from you and you don't know if you're going to get player rotation, it can affect your mentality and how well you do play. And so it is one of the things that frustrates me about coaching in the NBA and the focus on analytics is I think a lot of focus really should be given to things like psychology. The example I bring up all the time is this book called Soccernomics by Steven Szymanski. And in Soccernomics, he talks about how a lot of South American players, when they are signed by usually British soccer teams or UK soccer teams, seem to underperform. And his hypothesis is these players are signed, they're given a lot of money. They come over, they're a fish out of water, they're not used to the culture, it's freaking rainy all the time. And teams don't usually invest money in ensuring that a player is well situated when they do this, basically different country, different culture travel. And so in the book, he talks about some soccer squads, I forget which because I don't know soccer that well, that invested essentially in travel agents that said, we're going to spend millions of dollars on this star player from Brazil. Why the hell are we afraid of spending $20,000, $40,000 or whatever the equivalent pounds is or euros is a year on someone that's going to make sure they have a house, that knows where they can buy, the food they want, that knows where they, they can get fish and chips anywhere, but maybe they want to buy, I think in the thing he used like crisps or something is what he said, where they can go to do that. What if we invest the money in some type of person like that to ensure that our players are actually more acclimated and psychologically healthy? And this is one of those things in the NBA too, that it's why I'm such a huge fan of Coach Nick, of Art Rondeau, of Travis Heath, who is a psychology major. I think he has his PhD in it, if I recall. All of these, Dr. Travis Heath, all these people that focus on psychology, with the analytics, candidly, Brian, I think to myself a lot, for fuck's sake, you can still literally go to Boxscore Geeks, sort by wins produced, throw a dart at the top 5 that you think are available at each position, put that team together, go. I think that strategy, candidly, can win in the NBA. I think, but to the exact same point, I then think that the hard part, the part that you have to solve, is coaching those players to work together, making sure, because this idea, it was wrong with Melo, but this idea of Carmelo Anthony should come off the bench. We agree with that idea, not with Melo. We think that the idea of a floor general that gets 32-plus minutes a game, the Manu Ginobili, the Lamar Odom, is a fantastic strategy. But we think it's really, really hard to get productive players in their prime like Manu Ginobili to do it. So if you want to adopt that strategy like the analytics nerds are telling you, to implement it, you actually need a coach that knows how to get it done. That's a problem with a lot of analytics in the NBA. I've hated the idea of explaining the analytics to the coach. That kind of myth has come up a lot, and I don't like it. As what that's saying is, I have to explain to the coach why I'm right about the analytics. But I do think the better thing is, if an analytics person finds a strategy that works, you really do need a coach or front office that is then able to effectively convey it to the players. That was the true secret sauce of Moneyball to me. The math in Moneyball was trivial. I hate to be mean, but it's true. On-base percentage, whip, that stuff, exact same point. Make a list, throw a dart at the top 5 available, you're fine. The hard part is telling players, I don't want you to steal bases. The hard part is getting players, to take walks. The hard part is getting players like Hatterberg, right? One of the more famous people in the book Moneyball was a catcher, telling him, we don't need you as a catcher. We need you as a first baseman. And by the way, you only need to be this good. That's the hard part. And the same is true in basketball. So Trey Lyles, like I said, I think is a good player, but is playing bad this season. But I think a big part is what happened with Fareed in front of him. He's a guy that got paid real money to be a starting power forward, got dropped to the bench, and since getting dropped to the bench is now arguably the 3rd or 4th stringer. If you want that player on your squad to be a productive player, you have to find a way to make them deal with the fact that they're not the starter. And that's a hard problem that a lot of teams don't invest time in.
Yeah, and looking at his numbers, it kind of does look like he's pressing a little bit. And again, I'll qualify it. This is under 200 minutes, so he'll probably improve. But yeah, basically he's just taking more shots, shooting worse, and turning the ball over more. So it does seem like he's pressing a little bit versus last year.
And I mean, one of the hard parts, too, I'd have to check if I said hard too many times. One funny thing about last week's show, Brian, is I said the word rough, I think, 3 billion times. I even edited out a segment where I said rough just over and over again, and I'm going to have to work on that. Where sometimes
that's rough.
I don't have, Jesus Christ. If I don't have synonyms in my head for a word, I'll just use the same word over and over again. So I'll have to work on that. So I was saying hard. But in regards to the Nuggets, I completely lost my train of thought, by the way. So Nuggets, the lower seed. I completely lost what I was trying to say, Brian, because I said hard or rough. With the Nuggets, their defense is playing well. I'm just going to read what you got off of the script, Brian.
Yeah.
So they're 3rd in defense, 2nd in rebound. They are doing really great, and just seeing how that keeps up, I'm really excited about Millsap. I've liked their backcourt. Jokic is an MVP caliber player, so we'll just have to see if that keeps up.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the Bucks next, so I'll kind of combine these two topics here. Yeah, the Nuggets and Bucks have been the 2 best teams aside from the Warriors and Raptors basically so far this year, and they've done it with defense and rebounding, like you said. They just have big lineups and they defend you and they take the ball. And again, this is Moneyball, right? So going back to the Warriors, what I always say about them is I question their process with putting all this money into their wings and basically spending nothing at all on centers and big men. But they managed to keep turning up all these good big players for cheap, and they just keep moneyballing it. And the Nuggets kind of did the opposite, right? They spent a ton of money on big players, and they've spent so much that they have gotten good play, and they've been following your recipe for success, which is, ride this MVP Jokic. Their young guards are looking pretty good. Harris and Murray are leading them in minutes and have been solid. What they really need is for Will Barton to get healthy, and then for Paul Millsap to stay healthy. Yes. If they can do that, then this formula, I think, can keep up.
An interesting combination about the Bucks and the Nuggets is they legitimately had an addition by subtraction season.
Yep.
Last season, the Nuggets had Emmanuel Mudiay, who was terrible. This exact point I had on you don't give the damn car keys to a rookie or a young player. The Nuggets, admittedly, they got unlucky in that Ty Lawson had off-the-court issues. I believe he had alcoholism problems, possibly other drug-related issues, got into some off-the-court issues, and they essentially ended up severing ties with him. So they lost a key starting point guard, and they did it right before the start of the season, so they weren't expecting it. And so Mudiay got the keys and had one of the worst rookie seasons in NBA history. At that point, you find an established veteran. And the fact that Rondo has bounced around like 4 squads and played well on all of them should tell you right there that there were established veteran point guards to be had. Especially, we think draft picks are a joke. We think as an asset, a draft pick is worth nothing. And the reasoning being is actually the Warriors. That the Warriors picked up Jordan Bell, one of our favorite players in the draft, and actually Ty Lawson was the same situation, which is the Warriors said, we want this player. Okay, here's where they're going to fall to. They're going to fall to this range in the draft. Now, if they're the top 5, you probably can't afford them. And even if they're a lottery, you probably can't afford them. But if they're out of the lottery, you can probably find a way to trade for them. And sometimes the trade is as easy as cash. So, for instance, the Spurs wanted Kawhi. Kawhi falls out of the draft lottery.
That's what I was thinking of.
Oh, boom, we're going to trade you George Hill for Kawhi. And for what it's worth, I want to be careful because I think I've fallen in the bandwagon of saying that trade was not an even trade, and we were right because at the time we thought it was such a fleecing for the Spurs.
That was a risky trade for the Spurs.
It wasn't a risky trade because I don't think trading a point guard that's been playing out of their mind for a good asset when you have a point guard is a bad strategy, but I don't think it was as lopsided. I think the reason that trade looks more lopsided in hindsight is then, of course, that the Pacers go and trade George Hill for some other stupid stuff. It reminds me very much of the Charles Barkley trade back in the day for the 76ers, which was they got Jeff Hornacek, who went out to play well, but he didn't play well for them, and then they ended up letting him go in the offseason. So the reason it looked bad is they traded for a player that was a pretty good player, and in the long run it was fine, but they let him go, and so they ended up with nothing. And that happens a lot of times when teams do stupid trades, is they trade for an asset, they get some stuff back, they end up never using it, and then that's why the trade looks bad. But so we didn't think, that if you want to do that, you can probably find one mid-tier. You can just do money. And the Nuggets did that for Ty Lawson. They did money for Ty Lawson. The Golden State Warriors did that for Jordan Bell. So the point being, if you think you are going to make the playoffs, when the Houston Rockets were rumored at offering 4 first round, which would have been their picks in the draft lottery for Jimmy Butler, and people said it was a fleecing, my thought was, are you fucking kidding me? If they make one round of the playoffs, they make enough money in gate revenue to afford to just buy a pick in that range. And rest assured, there's going to be some team like the 76ers or the Nuggets that go, we don't really need anybody in the draft this year at this point. We're not really excited about anybody. We're probably just going to put them on the bench if we get them. First-round draft picks are more expensive than second-round draft picks. So they just go, we don't want it. And so if you come up and say, there's this talented big that Dave Barry or Ari Caroline or Arturo Galetti's numbers has listed in the top 10, and they fall into the 22nd draft pick, we'll give you $5 million for the rights to them. That'll happen. So we think draft picks for a team that is going to make the playoffs are nothing. So if you are a team like the Nuggets that needs a veteran point guard, you can get a damn veteran point guard, and that's what they didn't do. So in this offseason, they lose Emmanuel Mudiay. Who was the other player? They lose Wilson Chandler. These are 2 players that just the Dario Saric, Markel Fultz point. These young players with upside that just never materialized. They lost them and replaced their minutes with players they already had on the squad and have looked great. The Milwaukee Bucks, Thon Maker was getting major minutes last season. He has only played 51 minutes through 10 games. Last season, they had Jabari Parker, who towards the end of the season came back, played horribly, played in the playoffs, played horribly. They lost a 7-game series with him playing. They lost Jabari Parker, and I made a tweet that got some popularity today where I said Jabari Parker is winning games for teams. It's not the Bulls, but he is the reason teams are winning games in the NBA this season. He made my list for that reason. I said I was going to put a pin in it. He won, arguably, back-to-back. He won a game for the Nuggets against the Bulls, and he won a game for the Rockets against the Bulls. So he is just playing terribly. So the Bucks and the Nuggets both lucked out in losing 2 bad players. Now, I give the Bucks a little more credit in that one of the reasons they lost Thon Maker is they got Budenholzer in, and he's like, no. He's like, I'm not playing you. He did what we wanted out of a coach. Whereas the Nuggets, they traded Wilson Chandler away because they couldn't afford him to the 76ers of all places. And they've just lucked out in that all of the players that they had left on the roster are much better than Wilson Chandler.
Yeah, that sums it up well.
I don't have much else. If you've got anything else to say on the Bucks, Nuggets, or anybody else in the NBA, we can do that, and then we can get into our kind of more long-form stories and then be done.
No, I mean, we pretty much said it on the Bucks. Again, I love teams that are big and play defense, and this looks like the Bucks are going to be able to keep that up. One thing is they are shooting really, really well from 3, right? Brogdon is 43, almost 44%. Chris Middleton is 49.3%. Tony Snell, remember him, 46.4%. So even John Henson, the big man, Dre, 40% from 3. So a lot is being made about this Budenholzer effect, that he is one of the best, coaches in the NBA, and that's why their offensive improvement is there. I don't think we've really seen enough games yet to know if that's true. Call me back after we've had a few dozen more games. But so far, that seems to be correct.
And I do think there's going to be some wonkiness in the NBA until teams figure this out, because this is the fastest pace and most threes we've seen ever. The pace is faster than it's been since the 90s, and the three-point rate is the highest we've ever seen. So what we were just saying at the top of the show, where new strategies, who knows how they adapt, it's going to take some while for this three-point strategy to go down. And I think the Bucks are taking advantage of actually being a Morey ball team. I will say, parroting what I said last week, Chris Middleton and Ersan Ilyasova look really, really good. And they were good when they were younger, but have been bad for a few seasons. I'm putting them in that Covington category you did last season, Brian, which is, if they keep it up, sure. I don't know if they can keep it up, but we'll keep an eye out.
Yeah, and I love that point just real fast, going back to the 76ers. We were saying, well, they look pretty similar roster-wise and minutes to last year, but they're not as good. Well, they may be just as good, except look at the Raptors got way better with Kawhi. Boston Celtics are much healthier. We were just talking about the Bucks, how much better they are this year with better coaching and, better players. So if the 76ers kind of stayed the same, well, everyone else is getting a lot better.
Oh yeah, that's we've made that point about the NBA before, which is you have to be in constant maintenance mode because you are dealing with other teams that are getting better or getting older, et cetera. All right. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler again. There's a lot of wonkiness going on in Minnesota. Who knows what's going on? He's missed some games to health. There was some flack he got because I guess he was waving a towel in a game against the Warriors, and he doesn't play for the Warriors. But what I'll say, because I see a lot of people calling him unfaithful, disloyal, letting his team down, is I can agree wholeheartedly that athletes in the NBA might be entitled by the time they've made the NBA, because that means they've been considered great high school players, great college players, and now that they're in the NBA are being told they're great. I can buy that it's hard for them to be anything but maybe a little egotistical, maybe even narcissistic. But I will never side against them for one simple reason, and that's the draft. As long as the draft exists in professional sports, players do not get agency. And it's one to get this political slightly. Vote. If you haven't voted, please vote tomorrow. This show will probably go up, I'll try and make sure the show gets up tonight, Brian. So this is November 6th when the show goes up. Please just go out and vote. And I voted straight ticket Democrat. And I'm going to compare this to Jimmy Butler, which is to say there are arguments for why Jimmy Butler or diva athletes, Allen Iverson back in the day was notorious, are upsetting and infuriating. But I will never take the owners side against them because the owners have the draft, which strips players of all agency. If players were allowed to decide where they played, or there were no bird rights, as a reminder, the way a bird right works is if I sign with a team, the best contract I can get in the NBA is with that team unless they decide to trade me, which means when we see players trying to force a trade, when we see Kawhi trying to force a trade, when we see Butler trying to force a trade, the reason they are doing that is the only way they maximize pay and get to play where they want to play. And the NBA, after LeBron James's decision, tightened up a loophole that let them basically do that. Because back in the day, what you used to be able to do is when your contract was up, you could say, I want to play for that team and get a max contract. Your team signed you, traded you. The reason they were willing to do that is the other team would then trade back some assets, some second round picks. In LeBron James's case, some first round picks, maybe some role players. Back in the day, what happened for Grant Hill is they traded back Ben Wallace. The reason they traded back Ben Wallace was just to make contracts work. It wasn't that they were actually giving Ben Wallace because Ben Wallace wanted to sign them, but that's the point. Is that back in the day you could do that, but the NBA has routinely stripped players' agency of letting them play where they want to play, and so when you see players quote unquote misbehaving, which I find very patronizing, and I hate it does get into very much the racist attitudes we say the United States seems to have. I'll never take their side. So in the Jimmy Butler saga, just keeping checking in because it's still going, I'm just going to say the same thing, which is just that. I'm never going to take the player's side as long as the draft is in effect. The draft goes away, then we can talk. Until then, the owners never win. And to compare that back to politics, there would have to be a hinky level process on the Republican Party for me to ever vote for a Republican again in terms of the Senate or the House. It just will not happen. So same point, never going to side with the Republicans with where they're at now, never going to side with the owners with where they're at now. We'll see what happens with the Jimmy Butler saga, though.
I'm slightly more measured than you. First of all, everything you said is right. It's ridiculous comparing to other industries. However, I think that even when the other side is wrong, you can still, try to... What was the name of that book, Dre? Win friends and influence others, the original Carnegie book. Like, you're just hurting yourself by being a jerk to everyone if you're just talking about optimization, right? So Jimmy Butler's not wrong, but he could help himself a little bit more.
They're probably more. Well, we'll have to see what happens, because if his goal is, I want you to trade me to the Rockets, or I want you to trade me to the 76ers or the Lakers or whatever, and he gets that, I can't fault it. That's one of the hard parts that we run into. See, I keep repeating the word hard, Brian. That's one of the things we notice, though, is that people misremember how impactful a certain moment in a player's career is. For instance, the decision with LeBron, for instance, Kevin Durant going to the Warriors. I guarantee you in 10 years and 20 years when they're retired, people are going to be looking at how many wins they had, how many rings they had. They're not going to remember what they said. In fact, one of my favorite examples for this is Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley doesn't remember that he ring chased. He sits on a panel criticizing players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant for just chasing a ring and not winning. And he wanted to do it. And
I think he does remember and just says it anyway. But your point stands either way.
Players, and just to counter that too, both Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan were essentially demanding themselves off of their respective teams when they didn't think they could win, and their team said no. And then they won, and people are like, they're the most loyal ever. So I think history has borne out that people do not remember the social media crap as much as they remember the narrative of titles and rings. So I think even to Jimmy Butler, we'll just have to see how it pans out.
Yeah, he's not tarnishing his legacy, I don't think, and just because I would handle things differently, I mean... He's, remember that Insider article we were talking about a few weeks ago, right? Old school Jimmy Butler, this is how he likes to do things, so he's got to do things his way to be true to himself. As ridiculous as that sounds.
I am going to just make our last topic a shout out, but just make sure that it's out there. I did make a small post on it. Dave Barry has parted ways with Forbes, and it is under suspicious circumstances, which was written up about at the Washington Post. Dave Barry wrote a piece about the WNBA saying that with the G League raise, so that we talked about this a bit in the past, the NBA G League is offering a max deal, basically $125,000 to what would normally be a one and done player, but they are saying instead of being one and done, you can come to the G League instead. I think it's fantastic. We like that. But the WNBA noted a G League player can now get paid more than the top player in the WNBA can get paid. Subject for another day, by the way, but like max contracts in both the WNBA and NBA, things that aren't done in other leagues, are just ridiculous. But Dave Barry said, his thesis of the post that got taken down, because we'll talk that, was the NBA, in discussing WNBA players' salary, discusses it as a cost. We can't pay the players this much because it's a cost. But when they discuss paying an NBA G League player that much money, they say it's an investment. It's an investment in a player. And he says he doesn't think that's the wise strategy. Harkening back to Chris Ye's blitz scaling, if you want a young startup or league, in the case of WNBA, to grow, you might have to invest money, possibly inefficiently. And by the way, since players' salaries are tied to revenue, even then it's not inefficient. But you may have to actually invest money in your league growing. The WNBA may want to invest money in making sure that their games are played more places, that there is more advertisement for it so more people come. In the short run, it might be suboptimal. They might be losing money, but in the long run, it can gain them market share, which is worth something. So that was all Dave Barry was saying, is that it should be an investment be viewed as an investment as opposed to a cost. And that article got taken down, and then Forbes decided to end their time with him. And this comes a few weeks after Dave Barry wrote an article giving advice to the future WNBA president, arguing for things such as player pay. And allegedly, or not even allegedly, the Washington Post article says, after Dave Barry released that article, the NBA contacted Forbes, and then Forbes told Dave that he needed to start contacting sources at the NBA if he was going to talk about the WNBA, which he had been writing for Forbes for almost a year, had written many pieces about the WNBA. His editor had never wanted that to be the case before. So just the NBA officially, the NBA spokesperson, has said they did not ask for Dave's piece to be taken down, despite the fact that Forbes did take the piece down. However, they did start focusing at Forbes about advice on articles after he was starting to give advice to the WNBA about pay. So obviously this does not look great for Forbes, because it looks like they were strong-armed into removing a piece at the behest of the NBA. Although, like I said, I think the NBA is PR correct. They didn't say take the piece down. They just said, we are not a fan of this piece. That's and they've admitted that. So that's going on. We are definitely going to write more about this. I'm going to definitely try and talk to Dave about this. We're going to see where this piece goes. You noted to me right before football Sunday, this was briefly trending at the Washington Post. It was the top read story until, of course, NFL Sunday comes on. And unsurprisingly, sorry, Dave, 5 articles about the Washington Redskins. I hate that fucking name. 5 articles about the Redskins are going to be more popular than anything you write about the WNBA. But this is definitely fascinating, and I am excited to see where this goes, especially to the impact it's going to have on the WNBA CBA, because they did opt out and they're going to be going again.
Yeah, I won't say too much about this yet because I'm really behind in all the information. I know a lot less than you, and of course, Professor Barry himself. But I will point out that the WNBA players themselves have taken interest in this. And a lot of them came out and retweeted about this kerfuffle that happened with him getting let go. Even the player that the Washington Post chose to use for this story, one of the biggest stars in the WNBA, Elena Delle Donne, supported Professor Barry. So I guess that's great, even though it's, unfortunate what happened. And I'll just kind of, wait and see how this goes.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more. I mean, we've had a long show. It's not surprising. It's so easy. I may have to start cutting. I'm gonna have to do like the top 5 box scores of the week thing, where I cut a few topics. Maybe next week we don't talk the 76ers.
That's okay. We started early, so we got a lot of good talking.
All right. Well, anyway, that's been our show. Like I said, my shout-outs for this week. What was my first shout-out? I already forgot. Anyway, Dave Barry and something else. Oh, yeah, the Cracked podcast on the Spanish-American War. So check out the Washington Post for the piece on Dave Barry, and then check out the Cracked podcast. Those are my 2 shout-outs. Brian, you got any?
Yeah, I'll sneak one in there that I didn't put on originally, which was that we got to get the esports shout-outs in there, Dre. I always want to do that just for Twitch, broadcast completion here. BlizzCon was last weekend, and that's the World Championships of all the Blizzard games are there. And, of course, the one that I always like is StarCraft. That's the one Patrick likes as well. And it was historic because for the first time ever, a non-Korean, or in the scene as a foreigner, as they like to say, won BlizzCon for really? StarCraft 2. Pretty amazing, yeah. Cyril from Finland has done it. He beat Stats in the finals. So, yeah, Korea is going to have to look to get their revenge next year.
Love it. All right. Well, anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at Boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week. We on a streak again, Brian. We'll see if we keep it up. Twitch.tv/nerd numbers, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Possibly early. We went early tonight. Never mind, Brian. We don't have a schedule. You can find this show on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks show. Subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. If you want to catch replays, you can catch them on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And with us, as always, is the Spirit, Patrick Minton. You can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show. Have a cookie, and we'll see you next week.